I was never the kind of man who believed in miracles. I studied them, sure, an anthropologist by trade, a skeptic by nature. My mother prayed every morning before she opened the curtains. I ran equations before breakfast. To me, the universe was vast, beautiful, and entirely self-contained. God was a metaphor for the things we hadn't measured yet. But all that changed the night I found something dying in the desert. It was 3:14 a.m., the exact time my watch froze when the car stalled. The engine didn't cough or sputter, it just died, like someone had pulled the world's plug. I stepped out into the silence, expecting to smell burnt oil or see smoke. But the air was still, heavy, almost humming. And then I saw it. About 50 meters ahead, a shimmer in the sand, like heat mirage caught in a glass bubble. At first, I thought it was a drone crash. The thing was small, no bigger than a car, half buried in the dunes, metal bent inward like it had folded on itself. It pulsed faintly, every few seconds, like it was breathing. I approached slowly, phone light cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. That's when I saw the body. He, or it, was lying half outside the craft, sprawled like a man who'd fallen from a great height. His skin wasn't gray like in the movies. It shimmered between colors, shifting with the wind, almost translucent. I could see faint light flickering beneath the surface, as though his blood, or whatever he had, was luminous. His face was calm, almost human in its symmetry, except for the eyes. They were large, yes, but not alien in the grotesque sense. They looked ancient, patient. I remember thinking, absurdly, that he was beautiful. He made a sound, a low, rhythmic tone, like a prayer or a code. Instinct took over. I knelt beside him, hands trembling, whispering useless words. "You're going to be okay? I'll help you." He blinked once, a slow motion like the closing of twin suns, and touched my wrist. A warmth surged through me, not painful, but total, like standing in sunlight after years underground. When I woke, the ship was gone. Only a perfect circle of fused glass marked where it had been. The sand was melted smooth. My car started instantly, though my watch still read 3:14, and burned into the inside of my wrist. Faint but real, was a symbol. Two interlocking circles with a vertical line between them, glowing faintly when I pressed it. For days afterward, I told myself it was a dream. Radiation exposure, hallucination, desert fever, any explanation but the truth. But then the dreams began. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, with images I couldn't have invented, spirals of light that sang in harmonic waves, languages written in geometry, a vast city floating in a sky of liquid fire. And always, at the center of it, the same being, his eyes, calm and merciful, looking at me through what felt like eternity. 2 weeks later, NASA called. They wanted to speak about anomalous electromagnetic readings from the coordinates where I'd broken down. Apparently, a weather satellite had picked up a power surge lasting precisely 47 seconds, unlike anything they'd seen. I told them I didn't see anything unusual. They thanked me politely, said they might send a team, and hung up. That night, the dreams intensified. The being, whom I'd started calling Eli, began speaking, though not in words. Thoughts came like ripples, directly into my mind. "You helped me. Now I help you." I stopped sleeping. I started drawing instead, filling pages with spirals, equations, strange maps that made no sense. My colleagues worried. My sister begged me to see a doctor. But then the symbol on my wrist began to burn again, gently at first, then with an almost electric pulse. And I knew he was near. The second encounter didn't happen in the desert. It happened in my apartment, in the thin silence before dawn. The air shimmered, and suddenly Eli was there. Not solid, not ghostly, but something between. His presence filled the room like light through water. "You're real," I whispered. "I am what you believe real to be," he answered. Or rather, the words formed in my head as my body trembled. He told me he'd crashed because he'd descended too deep. His kind didn't travel through space as we knew it. They moved through resonance, through harmonies of existence. But this world, he said, was dense, heavy with division, and he had miscalculated the descent. When I asked what he meant by resonance, he raised his hand, and suddenly I saw everything. Layers of reality vibrating like strings, consciousness woven through them like melody. Each life, each thought, was a note in a cosmic song. And in that instant, I felt utterly connected to him, to everything. Then he said something that changed me forever. There was one who sang the first note. I thought he meant a god, a metaphor, but Eli's gaze deepened, and I realized he wasn't being poetic. The one you call Jesus, he said, is not what you think. Before I could ask, the vision shattered. The room snapped back. I was alone, but on my wall, where the light had touched, was another symbol, 2 circles again, but now crossed by a horizontal line forming a luminous cross. Over the next days, reality began to blur. Electronics flickered when I entered the room. Radios whispered my name between static. Once, my reflection lagged a second behind. Through it all, Eli's voice guided me. You are awakening. Do not fear. He showed me things, visions of worlds beyond ours. Some resembled heaven, others pure energy, others nothing we could describe in human terms. He said his people were the keepers of bridges, beings who traveled between harmonics to ensure creation didn't collapse inward. And Earth, he said, was near collapse, not from war or climate, but from disbelief. When a species forgets the song, Eli told me, its world loses tune. It fractures. You can hear it, can't you? And I could. The hum of the city, once comforting, now sounded dissonant, like a symphony unraveling. People's anger, the constant noise of fear and isolation, felt like feedback through my bones. Then came the vision that nearly broke me. He showed me Golgotha, not as history, but as moment. I saw Jesus, the man, the teacher, the divine frequency himself. But he didn't die for us. Eli said he died into us. The crucifixion was not punishment, but resonance correction. The nails didn't hold him. They anchored a cosmic chord, tuning humanity back to harmony. His resurrection wasn't escape from death, but proof that reality itself could be retuned. And then Eli said something even more impossible. I was there. He explained that his kind had been drawn to the moment of Christ's death because it was the single strongest burst of resonance in the history of creation. We witnessed the alignment, he said. The word becoming frequency, the universe re-singing itself. I fell to my knees. I don't know why, maybe instinct, maybe awe. The air around me vibrated, and for the first time in my life, I prayed, not to the God of my childhood, but to the vast, gentle intelligence behind all things. Eli placed his hand above my head, and everything went white. When I woke, I was in a hospital. They told me I'd been found unconscious in my apartment. No sign of trauma, heart rhythm perfectly normal, but brain activity off the charts. A nurse said I'd been muttering in my sleep, something about light and sound and love. I tried to explain, but words broke apart under their own weight. How could I tell them the truth? That an alien had introduced me to Jesus not as a savior from sin, but as the origin of physics itself. Days passed. I returned home, weaker but different. My senses felt amplified. I could feel emotions like weather, hear silence like symphony. I stopped teaching, stopped trying to explain. Instead, I waited, because Eli had promised he'd return. And he did, but not how I expected. It began with the sky. For 3 consecutive nights, a pulse of light appeared above the horizon, not moving, not fading. Thousands saw it. News stations called it an atmospheric phenomenon. But I knew. The frequency burned in my veins. On the 4th night, I drove back to the desert. The same spot where I'd first found him. The air was alive with charge. When I stepped into the circle of fused glass, my wrist symbol began to glow so bright it hurt. And then, he appeared. Not just Eli. Thousands. Forms of light, each singing in harmonic waves. The desert itself trembled with resonance. And in the center of them, shining brighter than all, stood a figure I couldn't look at directly. My knees buckled. My mind filled with a single, infinite tone. It was him. Not as the paintings showed, not robed or crowned, but as light personified, a waveform of compassion so vast I couldn't bear it. He spoke without speaking. I was never gone. You were simply out of tune. The beings, Eli's kind, knelt. And I understood, they weren't gods or demons. They were messengers, custodians of the song. Jesus, the first note, was their origin, their anchor. The galaxies weren't cold, random physics. They were echoes of that first divine vibration. Then he turned toward me. My life flashed, not as memory, but as melody. Every choice, every doubt, every breath formed a thread in the greater song. I realized that helping Eli was an accident. It was invitation. I'd been chosen to witness the retuning. The light intensified until it swallowed the stars. I expected to die, but instead, I felt myself dissolve into sound, into unity, into love. For one endless instant, I was everywhere. I saw Earth from above, wrapped in golden resonance, healing. I saw every human heart as a note being slowly tuned back toward harmony. When the light faded, I was kneeling on the glass again, alone. But this time, I wasn't afraid. The world felt alive again. The air hummed. The stars pulsed softly, like breaths of a sleeping god. Eli's voice whispered one last time. Now you know the truth. Tell them, not to believe, but to listen. So that's what I've done. I've spent years sharing the story, not as gospel, not as proof, but as reminder that beneath all matter, all conflict, all doubt, there is a frequency of love holding us together. You can call it God. You can call it physics. But once you hear it, you'll never be the same. And sometimes, when the night is still and the stars align, I swear I hear him singing back. The voice said, "Walk with me," and the world went very still. Rain froze in midair, each drop hanging like a bead of glass. The sound of the wind folded into silence. I took one breath, and the landscape changed. The ridge stretched outward into a corridor of light. Each step I took left ripples in the air, like footprints on water. Ahead of me moved a figure, tall, radiant, neither male nor female, its outline trembling between human shape and something more elemental. I followed. My shoes left the earth behind. Suddenly there was no ground, only a field of suspended particles glowing soft white. The air smelled like ozone and pine. Somewhere in the distance, thunder still rolled, but slower, as if time itself had thickened. "You called me by name," I said. My voice sounded small here, swallowed by the vastness. "How do you know me?" The figure didn't turn. "Because you've been listening all your life, even when you called it silence." Its voice wasn't sound so much as resonance, vibration through my bones. Every word carried layers, meanings folding inside each other like fractals. I tried to keep up. Kareth said they'd come again. The hunters. They already have. What do they want? They want to preserve the illusion that separation is real. Their survival depends on division. I frowned. And mine. The figure finally turned. Its face wasn't blinding anymore. It was clear, almost human, yet constantly shifting. Different ages, races, even species flickering through one expression. "Your survival depends on remembering," it said. I wanted to ask remember what, but the light around us contracted suddenly, and I saw scenes unfolding in midair. Earth seen from orbit, streaked with lines of data and energy. Each city pulsed like a neuron firing in a vast brain. "This is your world as it truly is," the being said. "Not dead matter, but consciousness condensed into form." I reached out. My hand passed through a floating image of New York. For an instant, I felt millions of heartbeats, overlapping hopes and fears like waves. It was beautiful and unbearable. "Why show me this?" I whispered. "Because you still believe you are alone." The light shifted again, and now I stood in what looked like deep space. No stars, just a faint golden mist. The being gestured, and a shape appeared. Kareth's kind, dozens of them, standing in a circle, each holding a small cube. "Kareth's people? They are what you will become if you continue," the voice said. "Translators between worlds. Bridges." My pulse quickened. "I don't understand. I'm just a man." "You are matter that remembers light," it said simply. "That is all any being ever was." The space trembled. Faint static crawled at the edges of the vision. I felt the cold return, the smell of rain and asphalt. "They're trying to pull you back," the being said. "Hold to the signal." I closed my eyes. The hum in my chest rose, the same tone from Kareth's cube, now joined by other frequencies, notes weaving into harmony. For a heartbeat, I felt suspended between two realities. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, I was back on the ridge. Night again. The rain resumed its fall as if no time had passed. The cube in my hand pulsed once and went dark. I collapsed to my knees, gasping. The hum faded, replaced by the distant wail of sirens somewhere in the valley. Later, sitting in my car, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My pupils glimmered faintly, catching light that wasn't there. When I breathed, tiny motes of luminescence drifted from my skin and vanished. Whatever that walk had been, vision, abduction, miracle, it had rewritten something fundamental. I switched on the radio out of habit. White noise filled the car. Then, buried in the static, I heard a fragment of a voice. Daniel Bridge. I nearly dropped the receiver. The transmission crackled, died. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly until dawn, watching the world wake through the haze of my windshield. Streetlights flickered as I passed, winking out one by one, as though some invisible current were flowing through me and short-circuiting everything it touched. When I stopped at a gas station, the pump froze on $7.77 and refused to move. The clerk stared at me, pale and trembling. "You feel that?" he whispered. "Feel what?" He pointed at the floor tiles. They were trembling, vibrating in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I left without the gas. By mid-morning I was back in town. The clouds hung low, almost metallic. People moved slower than usual, glancing up at the sky as if listening for thunder that hadn't come yet. Every phone screen I passed was glitching, brief flashes of light patterns, geometric shapes spinning behind the icons. At a stoplight, a boy no older than 6 tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed at me. "Mom," he said, "that man's shining." The mother hushed him, but her eyes widened. I turned the car around and drove until the houses thinned into fields. I pulled over by an abandoned observatory, an old dome left to rust at the edge of the county. I'd snuck in there once as a teenager to look at the stars. It felt right to return. Inside, dust floated in the shafts of light from cracked panels. The telescope was gone, but the circular floor plate remained, etched with constellations. As I stepped onto it, the cube in my pocket came alive again, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Kareth?" I whispered. Static filled the air. Then his voice came, faint but clear. "They are moving through your frequency. Hide nothing." "What does that mean?" "It means your world has already noticed. They will try to explain you with fear. Do not let them." The cube brightened until I had to shield my eyes. When the light faded, the symbols on the floor had changed. They weren't constellations anymore. They were maps. Not of space, but of thought. Each line pulsed as if alive. I crouched and touched one of the glowing lines. Instantly, my mind filled with images, towers of light rising from oceans, fields of energy stretching between planets, and in the center of it all, a network that looked disturbingly like human neural pathways. "This is us," I said. "Yes," Kareth replied. "Your species built it without knowing what it was. Technology is your unconscious reaching back toward the stars." I stood dizzy. "And the hunters? They feed on amnesia, on forgetting what you are. But they cannot survive once remembrance spreads." The cube flickered, the voice fading. "Kareth." Only the echo of my own voice came back. I left the observatory at dusk. The horizon burned copper. As I walked to the car, a low roar rolled through the air, too deep for thunder. The ground trembled again. I looked up and saw a formation of black shapes moving high above the clouds, lights strobing red beneath them. Not airplanes. Not anything I recognized. The hum in my chest surged. The cube pulsed in answer. The sky seemed to bend downward. I heard Kareth's voice one last time, faint as a thought. "Bridge." Now, without thinking, I lifted the cube above my head. The light that burst from it wasn't blinding this time. It was clear, clean, almost gentle. It shot upward in a single column that pierced the clouds. For an instant, the black shapes paused. Then they dissolved like smoke caught in sunlight. The light withdrew, leaving me alone under a sky suddenly full of stars. I sank to my knees in the tall grass, shaking. My hands still glowed, but softer now, like embers cooling. Back in the car, I sat in silence for a long time. My phone vibrated once more. The screen showed a live map with a single glowing point moving slowly west, somewhere toward the mountains. Beneath it, a message appeared. "Walk with me." Again, I started the engine. The radio came alive on its own. Static, then a woman's voice I didn't recognize. "All frequencies are converging. The bridge is opening." The transmission cut. I gripped the wheel and drove toward the mountains. The road climbed into the mountains like a ribbon of ash. My headlights cut narrow tunnels through the fog, and every curve felt like a question the earth kept asking me. Are you sure you want to know? The radio had gone silent again, yet I could still hear the hum. Low, constant, as if the car itself were breathing. With each mile it grew stronger, not louder but denser, pressing gently against my ribs from the inside. When the asphalt ended, I parked beside a rusted gate and continued on foot. The air was colder up here, metallic with the scent of rain and rock. The sky had cleared enough to show a scatter of stars, though they didn't look like any constellations I knew. They pulsed, slow and deliberate, like distant heartbeats synchronizing to something unseen. I followed the map on my phone, the single glowing point drifting west, but soon the signal faded. The screen went black. Still, the light in my palms answered, brightening whenever I faced the right direction. It felt less like navigation and more like memory. The trail wound through spruce, trees heavy with moss. Every sound, crickets, the crackle of branches, seemed to echo a little too long, as though the mountain itself was listening. After an hour, I reached a clearing where the ground fell away into a valley. At its center, mist churned like smoke trapped in a bowl, and through it rose pillars of pale stone that caught the starlight and bent it into halos. I sat on a boulder to catch my breath. The air vibrated faintly. Somewhere below, water trickled over stone, a rhythm older than speech. That's when I noticed the movement, threads of light drifting upward from the valley floor. They twisted together, forming a spiral column that reached toward the sky and vanished into the cloud cover. It wasn't violent. It was patient, like the slow turn of galaxies. I knew, without understanding how, that this was the bridge. Every cell in my body seemed to lean toward it. I climbed down the slope, sliding on wet grass, half slipping, half drawn. The closer I came, the more the air shimmered, fine particles floating around me, each the size of a breath. When I reached the valley floor, the world changed texture. Sound muted, colors deepened. Even my heartbeat slowed until it matched the hum. The pillars weren't stone after all. Up close they were transparent, filled with threads of light that moved like nerves pulsing with thought. Between them hung veils of energy, membranes that rippled when I passed. I stepped through one. The sensation was like walking through memory. Flashes of my childhood, my mother laughing, Karitha's eyes, the accident on Route 19, all overlaid at once, as if time had become a single surface I could see from both sides. Beyond the veil stood an expanse of faint luminescence, neither sky nor ground. At the center of it, a sphere of white light floated, slowly turning. Shapes drifted within it, human silhouettes, alien outlines, even forms I had no words for. The hum rose into harmony. A voice, the same one that had said walk with me, spoke again, everywhere and nowhere. You've carried the frequency long enough. Step forward. My throat tightened. What happens if I do? Then you'll remember that you were never separate from it. I hesitated, staring at my hands. The glow was steady now, calm, as if waiting for my decision. The voice softened. The bridge is not a place, Daniel. It's a choice. I took a breath that felt like it might never end, then stepped into the sphere. For an instant, gravity inverted. The valley, the mountains, even the sky folded inward, and I was suspended in pure light, weightless, thoughtless, alive in every direction. I felt currents moving through me, memories that weren't mine, civilizations older than Earth, languages of color and sound. Each one touched me and passed on, like waves recognizing another wave. Somewhere within that brightness, I sensed Karith again, no longer as a shape, but as a tone within the vast chord. Bridge complete, his voice murmured, and then dissolved into the chorus. The light flared, and everything went quiet. When I opened my eyes, dawn had reached the valley. The pillars were gone. Only mist and the sound of running water remained. My phone lay beside me, screen cracked, displaying a single message. Remember. I turned it over. The casing was warm, faintly pulsing, as if a heartbeat still lived inside. Above me, the clouds parted, and the first rays of sunlight touched the ridge. For the first time in months, I felt no fear, only an aching, impossible stillness. Whatever the bridge had done, the world hadn't ended. It had simply become transparent, and I could see the light beneath everything. When the light faded and I was back in the valley, I thought the world would look the same. It didn't. Everything carried a quiet shimmer, not bright enough to blind, just enough to remind me that the air itself was alive. When the wind moved through the trees, it left trails of silver for a moment before they vanished. Even the sound of water seemed to hum with an undertone I'd never noticed before. I walked until I found the road again. My car was where I'd left it, streaked with dew. The engine started without a key. The dashboard flickered, showing coordinates that weren't on any map. They shifted once, then stabilized, home. For 3 days I slept in bursts. When I did, I dreamt of people I'd never met. A woman soldering wires in a Nairobi lab. A boy standing on a rooftop in Sao Paulo staring at the same stars. An old fisherman off the coast of Japan humming the tone I had heard in the valley. They all looked up at the same instant, as if someone had whispered, "Now." When I woke, my phone was filled with messages, friends, co-workers, even strangers asking if I'd seen the news. Across the world, radio frequencies were bleeding into each other. Static carried harmonics that formed the same three-note pattern Kareth had shown me. Power grids fluctuated but didn't fail, they pulsed in rhythm. Animals migrated in new directions. Magnetic compasses drifted east for exactly 7 seconds each hour, then settled again. The world wasn't breaking. It was tuning. I walked through town the next morning. People seemed lighter, slower to anger. A man who never looked up from his phone smiled at me for no reason. At a crosswalk, 2 strangers laughed at the same sound of pigeons taking flight, like they were remembering something together. A reporter's voice came from a shop window TV. Scientists are calling it a global resonance anomaly. No radiation, no danger detected. Just music. The camera cut to a beach where hundreds of people stood barefoot in the surf, eyes closed, listening. That evening, I drove back to the ridge. The sky burned red at the horizon, fading to violet overhead. The hum was still there, softer now, woven into everything. Kareth appeared one last time, just a silhouette of light standing beside the car. "You kept your promise," he said. "I didn't know I'd made one. You remembered. That was enough. What happens now?" He looked toward the horizon. "Now you forget again, but less completely. That is how worlds evolve." The outline of him began to thin, threads of light drifting away like sparks on the wind. "Will I see you again?" I asked. "You already do," he said, and was gone. Months passed. Governments stopped trying to explain the phenomenon. It simply became part of the weather, sometimes audible, sometimes just felt in the chest. People called it the breath. Suicide rates dropped. Old rivalries cooled. Not vanished, just softened. As if everyone had been given a brief glimpse of the same truth and was trying, clumsily, to hold on to it. I moved back into my mother's house. The garden she loved grew wild but vibrant. Fireflies appeared earlier in the season than they used to. On quiet nights, I sat on the porch and listened. The hum was faint but steady, and every now and then I could feel the pulse under my skin answer it. I never saw another craft in the sky. But once, during a storm, lightning split the clouds, and for half a second I thought I saw figures made of light walking across the ridge, carrying something that glowed like the cube. Maybe they were only reflections. Maybe they were us. One morning, I found a message etched in the condensation on my window. 3 simple words that faded as I watched. Bridge still open. And when the sun rose, its first light spilled through the glass, scattering across the walls in patterns that looked like wings. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The world was already walking with me.